You know, he was Hitler's personal architect, a top minister in the Third Reich, and, maybe most famously, the man who somehow convinced the world he was the good Nazi. But was Albert Speer really a remorseful professional just caught up in something terrible? Or was he a master manipulator who spun an incredible myth to save his own life? Well, today we're going to step into the courtroom and find out.
Right out of the gate, Speer himself gives us the key. He frames his own story as this grand, tragic bargain. I mean, think about that. This isn't just a legal defense, it's a narrative. A really chilling admission that his ambition was so huge, so all-consuming, that he was willing to make a deal with the actual devil to achieve it. This one quote, it's the lens through which we have to see everything else he says.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Who was this guy, really? The good Nazi or a master of denial? In this explainer, which is based on the absolutely gripping book My Favorite Nazi, we're essentially going to put you in the jury box. We'll lay out the evidence from his trial, and you can weigh it for yourself.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to explore the myth of Speer himself. Then, we'll get into that deal with the devil. After that, we'll dig deep into the crime of what's called willful blindness. We'll unpack his very clever defense of responsibility without guilt. And finally, we'll look at the verdict and the powerful warning it carries.
All right, first things first, let's establish the character we're dealing with. Albert Speer went to great lengths to paint a very specific picture of himself. An artist, an architect, a man of culture, who was just fundamentally different from the monsters and thugs in Hitler's inner circle.
And this contrast is absolutely crucial to understanding his whole defense. You see, the rest of the Nazi leadership, they were fanatics, true believers, criminals. But Speer? Oh no, he was the polished professional, the intelligent technocrat. He argued he was not a bird of the same feather, and that carefully crafted distinction became the bedrock of his entire post-war image. But don't let that image fool you. Make no mistake, this supposedly apolitical technocrat wielded an incredible amount of power. He wasn't just sketching buildings, he was an essential pillar of the entire Nazi state, holding at least 12 major positions. He was right there at the very heart of the machine.
So how on earth did he justify this incredible rise to power? Well, Speer's defense was honestly simple and pretty seductive. He claimed he wasn't driven by some fanatical Nazi ideology. No, he was just blinded by his own professional ambition.
And this quote right here, this gets to the absolute core of it. He's saying he sold his soul not for a political cause, but for the chance to build on a scale that is just unimaginable. I mean, for an architect in the 1930s, can you imagine the offer? Hitler basically gave him an unlimited budget and a blank check to make his wildest dreams a reality.
And believe me, those dreams were colossal. He and Hitler would spend nights planning Germania, this massive new world capital for their 1,000-year Reich. They were so consumed by this vision, they even came up with this crazy concept called ruin value, designing the buildings so that they would crumble beautifully over millennia, like some future Roman Empire. It's just wild.
But of course, as his power grew, so did his complicity. And that brings us to the central accusation against him, and to his primary defense, that he simply chose not to see the horrors that he was helping to create.
So as Minister of Armaments, Speer wasn't just a minister, he was an industrial titan. At the height of the war, he was in charge of a workforce of a staggering 14 million people, all keeping the Nazi war machine humming.
And here's the horrifying reality hidden inside that number. By his own estimates, half of his entire workforce, that's 7 million human beings, were slave laborers, forced to work in the most brutal, inhumane conditions imaginable.
This might be the most damning confession he ever made. It's not a claim of ignorance. It's an admission of chosen ignorance. He's literally saying he saw just enough to know that he had to look away, to protect his conscience and, let's be real, his career.
And the prosecutor's response just cuts right through that excuse like a knife. The case wasn't about what Speer didn't know. It was about what he actively chose to ignore.
You see, Speer operated in a system that was brilliant at disguising its cruelty with boring, bureaucratic language. Take Schutzhaft, or protective custody. It sounds almost harmless, right? But in reality, it was the legal loophole the Gestapo used to make people disappear into concentration camps forever, with no charges, no trial, nothing.
So, this all leads us to the ultimate question, the one his entire defense rested on. Okay, maybe he knew about slave labor,
But could he plausibly claim that he was unaware of the systematic extermination of Europe's Jews? Was that even possible for someone in his position?
Well, the prosecution then presented what they believed was the smoking gun. It was a recording of a speech by the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, at a conference in Posen, and in it, Himmler explicitly states that the extermination of the Jews is official policy. And guess whose name was on the attendance list for that conference? Albert Speer.
Speer's response to this was just audacious. He admits, yeah, I was at the conference, but then he claims he just conveniently had to leave right before Himmler gave that particular speech. It was this desperate alibi that rested entirely on his word against the sheer improbability of missing the main event of the whole conference. So, faced with this damning evidence, Speer pivots to his most sophisticated, his most intellectual argument, a philosophical attempt to separate his moral responsibility from his legal guilt. So here's his final card. He tries to draw this very fine line. On one hand, he accepts collective responsibility. He says, yes, I was part of a government that was a catastrophe for the world. But on the other hand, he flatly denies any personal guilt under the law, arguing he never personally ordered or committed a specific punishable crime.
And this is his final rationalization. It's such a haunting statement. He not only separates responsibility from guilt, but he also widens the circle of blame, basically suggesting that his own willful blindness was just what everyone in the entire nation was doing.
So, how did the court respond to all this? To this very elaborate defense? Let's turn to the verdict, and maybe more importantly, the chilling warning it holds for all of us, even today.
The court's verdict was actually pretty nuanced. They found him not guilty of conspiring to start the war, mainly because he joined the government after it had already begun. But for his use of millions of slave laborers, he was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The sentence? 20 years in prison. But in his final judgment, the judge pointed out the real danger of Speer. Unlike the other defendants, he wasn't a frothing fanatic. He was a brilliant, ambitious opportunist, which makes his example so much more relevant in any age, including our own. And we end with the judge's final, powerful warning. The true lesson here is to recognize the danger of ambition without a moral compass. This whole fascinating, complex moral drama is laid out so well in the book My Favorite Nazi. If you want to dive even deeper into Speer's mind and the incredible arguments of this trial, you can find a link to purchase the book in the description below. It is a powerful story about the temptations of power that is frankly as relevant today as it was back in 1946.